Good evening, everyone. Welcome to SAR's July meeting. Well, tonight we are delighted to welcome again Daniel Sowelu for visiting us in person and to give us his talk. We must also say thanks and appreciate for the people who have braved the weather to come in to see us as well. So thanks a lot. I hope you enjoy tonight. And how about Daniel? Daniel, I should say. He's a therapeutic and experiential astrologer, multi-skilled therapist, group facilitator, and a sacred tour guide. Now in his 41st year of practice, he's a global leader in experiential astrology and a passionate advocate for reclaiming the sacred feminine within astrology. So I'd like you to put your hands together and say, welcome, Daniel.
But you can see that. All right. Well, we're here. Thank you very, very much. I'm excited, nervous that I'm putting this work because it's something I've been developing very early on in my career. It's another one of those places where stories coming out this year.
Yeah, so people at home can stand behind the thing, they'll be able to see because they're looking at you from there.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, we can move it forward. Yeah, we thought that. Okay. So I hope you all heard that. Now, let's jump straight into it. There we go. It's been known for a long time that, however unpublished it has been, but in many systems, conception is as important as our birth. And from a therapeutic point of view, that is also true. And some would say that the conception is even more significant because it's our very, very cellular beginning. And whatever these two biggest cells in the human body, when they meet, there is all sorts of layers of absorption that happens in that moment and around that time. And that then gets replicated in every cell in our bodies. So on that level, it's incredibly significant. Now, we all know that, okay, there's this huge DNA transfer between egg and sperm, and you know, that's really well documented. What's less well known is what's now called epigenetics. And epigenetics are absorption of influences that are strong enough so they sink down onto the DNA level, but they don't change the DNA, but they change the way the DNA gets expressed. So we're still on that really, really deep subcellular level when we're talking about influences around conception. Now, none of this will make sense, what I'm going to share tonight, unless you really get two concepts, one of which is cellular consciousness. And cellular consciousness represents the fact that even though we are two cells colliding, that absorption has incredibly subtle levels of consciousness that we're still learning a lot about. For instance, we used to think that the winning sperm was the one who won the prize, you know, who fertilized the egg. But no, the egg waits and chooses, and it's not the winner. It can be any of them. Yeah. So there's that level of consciousness. The other level of that consciousness is that it covers memory. We have memory, which is why a lot of the practices that created this body of knowledge are all about dropping into deep layers of awareness within ourselves, of accessing those pre-existing and not necessarily conscious moments. Yeah? And the other concept is this notion of epigenetics, that there is this psychological and spiritual absorption that happens simultaneously, much like our Chiron positions, much like our Neptune positions, or any other place where we're excessively open psychically and spiritually. And this point of conception is both a cosmic experience on one level, but on another level, it's a ginormous absorption experience. So we're going to talk a little bit about the layers that come through. Okay. Just so you know where I'm drawing this stuff from, the person who woke me up to this was Tad Mann. Anyone remember him? He wrote The Ground Art. And an early book of his. Now, he was also a brilliant mathematician. And he worked out intuitively, combined with mathematically, in his view, that the conception point is a ninth house cusp. And everything that is reflected from the ninth to the 12th to the ascendant, which is the birth position, represents different energetic experiences of that child. Yeah. Now, my original background, I was a human biologist, and one of my specializations was reproductive biology, human reproductive biology. And that was a total accident as a late teenager kind of thing. However, when I was reading this stuff, I was a practicing astrologer already for about 4 years. And I ended up training in what's called primal therapy. And primal therapy was a very deep form of expressive, emotionally based work created by a brilliant US psychiatrist called Arthur Janov of Primal Scream fame. Anyone remember that book came out? It was a real burst onto the scene. Now, I didn't work with him, but the person who I trained with Janov, and Janov didn't understand or hadn't perceived the connection with in-utero states, but this man, Graham Farrant, who became the Australian pioneer of this work, recognized that not only birth material was coming up in this therapy, but also in utero experiences. And people were having memory of their conceptions. Yeah. And that had already happened to me organically in the very first workshop I attended with him. I had no conscious connection with any of this. But in the space of 2 days, I had 3 different experiences, layers of experiences of my actual conception. And you can feel mum and dad impregnated in egg and sperm. You can feel where they were at. You can get a sense of what their relationship dynamic was like. And there's just layers of information that come through. And it's totally a deep inner process, like deep meditation, but it's more organic and it's in your body. So at the same time as Tad Mann was publishing this book, I was doing this training and starting to have these experiences. The other sources of this stuff is, notice we've been talking about men, scientists, obstetricians, etc. Women's traditions, women's mystery traditions have known about this for thousands of years. As usual, science and the masculine has to catch up. Yeah. Some of the work that this comes from is called spiritual or shamanic midwifery, which is midwifery that takes into account, like the spiritual dimensions, the psychological dimensions, the physical dimensions, beyond just medical midwifery. And I was fortunate enough to have married a spiritual midwife. And we had 17 years together running groups and stuff. So that was a part of it as well. What I'm sharing tonight. Now, out of this, at this time, I created what I call conception to birth experiential workshops using primal therapy, using visualizations, meditations from spiritual midwifery, and using experiential astrology. And over a weekend, we would work from the conception point of individual's chart as a group, working your way through the different stages to the ultimate birth experience. And so that, I created that in '89, so I've been running one, usually about one a year. So a lot of people's experiences, you know, I could tell you lots of stories the whole night about things that were coming up, but I'll give you a bit more of a, excuse me. So this is all where this stuff comes from. Yeah. And it seems to work. I wouldn't be doing it unless it actually produced really, really significant experiences in terms of what people were connecting to, in terms of healing that was happening, in terms of being able to move energies that come from these other sources. So I feel really privileged that I was in the exact position to be able to, you know, collect these diverse sources. As I keep on wanting to walk. As I said, Tad Mann believed out in his system that conception was the 9th house cusp. Yeah. Well, this is what I've got about. That didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel right energetically. Yeah. But I was prepared to kind of, you know, sit with it and see what happens. However, during my training with Graham Farrant, we had a number of fellow trainees, and I had access to their charts as they were working very similar territory. And this, can you see that chart reasonably well? Yeah. This is a chart of one of my colleagues whose name I'll call Kay. Fantastic. Thank you. Yay. Now, keep in mind tonight, some of the examples I'm going to share, there's some significant trauma involved. So if any of you start feeling a bit squeezy, queasy, if you're not feeling okay, if you've got total permission, please, go out and have a breather somewhere else. Yeah. Because even in talking about this stuff, for people who are really sensitive, sometimes this can be triggering. A lot of us don't know what's there. But I also want to say, because this all comes from a therapeutic orientation, I will balance that out with some of the other experiences that people have, as well as the hardcore ones. But this was the chart that actually cracked what I believe to be the 8th house cusp, is the conception point. Now, this is so literal, it was mind-blowing. And I'll tell a little story. It's actually the birth time slightly out, but this chart did the trigger. And even with the change in birth, the birth time changed the chart. It still reinforced what I'm about to present to you. Now, here's Kay's Venus in Gemini. And her experience was that she was a twin. And, that level of bonding, twins get created in the second cell division immediately after conception. And it was a brother. And she had the experience in this therapy in a deep state that her mother had attempted to abort her with a knitting needle, which was a common practice contraception. And the knitting needle got her brother, but missed her. Now, I can't, even now it takes my breath away, the level of trauma and loss, and it was a huge experience for her. But when you look at it, like here's, what is essentially a gorgeous Venus in Gemini, in the middle of the 8th house. So conception has already happened. So conception must be earlier. And that's where I started to hover around conception. The 8th house is the conception point in the chart. Now, I'm going to be publishing this in a broader way, and I've got a book on it's taken me ages to write. But this is only the second time I've revealed it to a group like you guys. And what the other astonishing thing was how literal the opposition from Venus to Saturn is. Because there's Saturn in Sagittarius, and the knitting needle can be seen as an expression of the center of our. Now, this was an astonishing thing to observe what happened for her at the time. Even with the difference in birth time, it still applies. So this is when I created these workshops. So basically then, if we're going to track the in-utero journey for an individual, or at least have some idea of what's going on there, we start the 8th house cusp, and then we work our way around. Now, there's a specific visualization to take people into their conception experiences, and that has worked time and time again on their 8th house cusp. So there's empirical support for this, which is why I've kept doing it. So if you think about anything else that's happening in the chart, for instance, Kay has a moon conjunct Uranus, which talks about the mother, talks about the strange bond with the mother. And, you know, we can do that from traditional astrology. But we can also say that somewhere, particularly in the first half of the pregnancy, that moon Uranus acted out in some way. Yeah. We may not know what it is, but we do know something has happened there. Now, it turns out that her mum is likely undiagnosed mental illness, was highly erratic. She could be incredibly loving and then incredibly cruel, and oscillating between them. And in Leo, like a significant narcissist. And so, you know, the interruption, and Kay's a Cancerian. You interrupt the maternal bond, Cancers suffer more than most. Okay? So some expression of that is likely to have happened, probably after the end of the first trimester. Yeah. Now, as I said, this scheme, this way of looking at it, doesn't fit with the houses. So you're not going to be interpretively as accurate as we would like. But if you divide up those 5 houses into 3, you've got something like the conception to the middle of the 9th, middle of the 9th to the middle of the 11th, and the 11th to the 12th, the last trimester. So this was an extension of what Tad Mann was promoting. Now, these are just some of the reasons why I got more and more confident that the 8th house cusp was the conception point. It follows the house of committed relationships. Okay, so you, particularly with individual's first child, what thing, you know, those of you who've had kids, what are the things that arise in you once you immediately know that you're pregnant? What are the things you start to think about? Well, you start to think about, okay, how am I going to be as a parent? You know? How is the relationship I'm in? Is this worth is this going to work? How are we going to afford this if one of us has to stop working? if it's your first child and you've got unhealed birth trauma itself, it's going to bring up some significant fears. Will I survive this? Do you hear some of the 8th house issues there? Yeah. Yeah, health, survival, relationship issues, where the relationship's at. Also, the first house is the most common time of miscarriage. And here's that life and death symbolism. As for twins, it is estimated that 1 in 7 of us is a surviving twin. This was information that was coming through in the 80s, so I don't know whether that's gone just yet. But that's a really high proportion. And there are particular archetypes that can represent the loss of a twin or an unhealed loss, whether earlier miscarriage, the death of an earlier child, for instance. Yeah. Even the conception is a life and death experience, because what happens to the winning sperm is that he wins the prize, but his head blows up and he loses his tail. So, and some people in those deep states report significant pain emerging around their sacrums when they're going into that experience. Yeah. Also, the egg, who's this big, biggest cell in the human body, it's like awesome. She loses her singularity. You know, she's penetrated, and then everything changes. Yeah. So even there's a kind of a life and death issue. And then almost immediately, there's the beginning of cell division, which is a death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death, rebirth, over a short period of time. So for all of those reasons, this is why I was kind of happy to see the 8th house, the beginning of it being conception, and most of the 8th house will be first trimester. Yeah. Now, on the basis of that, what happens to us, where mum and dad were at the time, even what their financial status was at the time, all that got absorbed. Positive and negative experience. Okay. And so in our charts, whatever's there is going to give us some important clues. Now, to keep things simple tonight, we're just going to talk about, conjunctions. We're not going to worry about rulers. We're not going to worry about aspects. You got time to explore that. But these experiences, particularly conception and birth, are incredibly multi-layered. And in this regression work, whatever vehicle, you can revisit these on a number of occasions. And each time there's new information coming in. Now, just for a moment, I'm going to step back a bit. Like, this is weird territory, unless you've known it, unless you've experienced it. Because this is all in a therapeutic context, I tend to get people who have trauma around these times coming in. It's not the only expressions, but a chart will quite easily represent some form of trauma or at least energetic influence, depending on what planets and asteroids are around these places. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Yeah, making sense? Epigenetics, the psychospiritual absorption process. Here are some of the influences. Okay, mum and dad, how's the relationship going in general? Yeah, where are they at with each other? Is it well established? You know, whatever is the current status, that's going to be somehow reflected. Whether either of them have any trauma around 8th house issues, particularly sexual trauma, because that's going to impact whatever's unhealed in this territory can also be absorbed. I can't tell you how many clients I've had who've come to me for sexual trauma work, and then it turns out mum and even grandma have trauma. Anyone else found that? Yeah. So that stuff can come through. Transgenerational influences in general, particularly around the actual conception, because in some ways, independently of the psychology of things, the actual conception is a cosmic experience, literally. And in some ways, it's the purest union you will experience in this lifetime. It's like the very first experience of the sacred marriage. And when you hit that place or experience that place, you feel like you're a birthing god or goddess. You feel like you're a supernova. It is a totally ecstatic, cosmic, unified experience. Yeah. So that's there in all of us, despite these influences, but these influences do kick in. And this is why, and at that time, we're also extremely open. And this is where there's different levels of the absorption. On a more immediate level, where mum and dad were at sexually, within themselves and with each other. Yeah. Particularly around that particular episode or episodes of lovemaking. And for the few days later, because sometimes it can take up to a week for the sperm to reach the egg. And then it takes another 3 days to implant. So it doesn't all immediately happen, but those sexual experiences and the quality of them are deeply influential. Now, with Kay's chart, in this first chart, she had Hygeia on her conception point. Now, that may not be accurate anymore, but Hygeia is a Kundalini goddess of healing. So if that was an accurate chart, I would say this person, okay, there's this shitty stuff after conception, there's this trauma there. But the actual conception was one of those Hygeia energy, it invites us to surrender into deeper places, including sexual. And if we can let go enough, it will elicit an organic, spontaneous, all body healing experience, which is an extension of your average orgasm. Yeah. So however damaged mum and dad were in a situation, this is a time when something extraordinary opened between them that was bigger than them. Yeah. And that's there too. Yeah. So you start to see the different layers. As for the transgenerational stuff, this is just as significant as your fourth house, your IC, Chiron, etc. Anywhere where transgenerational, particularly wounding experiences, but also healing energies can come through. So that
Hey, is anyone still on?
No, I'll give
I'm
Cheryl,
not.
but I
I'm
don't
not.
think it'll mean anything.
I've emailed Ben, but I don't know if he is on email at the moment. So
So do we just hang? And that,
I think so.
I don't know. I guess so.
Wait, I suppose it's, yeah, these things happen.
What can we talk to?
don't know.
Ben would be the one you'd have to contact somehow. He's the techno guy.
Ben.
I've just texted Lawrence, so hopefully he sees it and he's in the room.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, that's good, thanks, yeah.
Do they join us back in, or do we have to join back in?
They will have to join back in. Wouldn't be surprised if maybe the computer's batteries gone.
What?
As in the batteries run out. But anyway, we'll see.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think the battery on the laptop's run out.
Okay, here we are.
Oh, here, Ben's back.
Hi guys, sorry, we seem to drop out of power, but I think we're good. So Daniel, if you're able to pick up, I think we should be good to go. That'll come on. Should be good.
Okay. One minute. Thanks.
Sound has been really hard.
Okay, I was talking about
Sound is terrible. Also,
what audio comes through.
I might just get you guys at home if you don't mind muting yourself. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so we were talking about the balance between the wounded stuff in us and the healed stuff in us. And, you know, reflected on one level by Chiron, but also like, you know, basically question marks about how healthy versus unhealthy our individual family system. And on one level, we're all from dysfunctional families. It's just the degree of dysfunction. That's the issue. But around this conception place, because it is so significant, Graham was advocating education programs for people to prepare, not just for birth, but prepare for conception, which would be ideally, you know, taking a holiday for a few weeks, no alcohol, no drugs, lots of rest, diminishing stress, you know, taking out some of the environmental energies, and as well as facing, you know, parents, you can't force people to face their stuff, but support them when stuff arises. So, the other interesting thing is that when Graham was training people in this work, this included some of the pioneers in Australian IVF programs, and one of the leaders of that actually became a primal therapist specializing in this work himself. But one of the other significant points, decided he wasn't going to continue the work because he couldn't justify continuing with the IVF program, you know, like creating new souls in, you know, test tubes, if you like, test tube babies, because it's such an artificial influence. So it'd be interesting. You know, there's so much room for research in this territory. There's astrologically and otherwise. Yeah, I'd love to get the charts of IVF babies. Yeah. All right. Now, just to balance out, it's not all drama. One of my early clients had a Moon Neptune conjunction in Scorpio in the middle of the 8th. Yeah. And she went into this glorious experience of just being enveloped in the most exquisite, the most beautiful love, you know, which was her mother. Like, you know, even though she's this small, there was already this experience of being enveloped in love, you know. And she had good aspects to that moon Neptune. So astrology. Another client with hard aspects to a similar moon Neptune conjunction. She was conceived in the haze of an alcohol and drug binge by both her parents. And when she went back into that experience, it was so disgusting. And this is what they call the toxic. Whether that toxicity comes from drugs or comes from unhealed territory, we don't know. But in her case, it was very much so. She and her daughter became a drug addict, had a daughter herself, and so my client had to take on the grandchild. So there's this whole kind of generation thing that's happened there. Arrow keys. Oh, thank you. Another of my favorite examples is a client who was born in Malta just after the war. So her parents had been through the siege of Malta, so that was really good. She had a Sun, Mercury, Saturn conjunction on the IC. Her mother, and as another Scorpio moon, her mother was agoraphobic. And and yet when she got pregnant, something completely shifted. And she would walk openly across the island and lay on the ground and just absorb the energies, not just of the environment, but also the ample goddess energies, because there's a very ancient Neolithic goddess tradition there. And my client had Jupiter in Aquarius just in the 9th house. So in that first trimester. Yeah. And the client went on to being an advocate for reclaiming the goddess traditions and became a writer and journalist and has written books and poetry. So all that was kind of put in place, around the mum just being this absolute bliss bomb out in the sun and the fields. So yeah, it's not all. Oh, where are we going?
Oh, coming on.
All right, thank you. All right, here's another interesting chart to look at just to flesh things out. And we'll need to get on to birth very soon, so this is just timing wise just right. Here's her 9th house, 8th house cusp. It's the goddess Parvati, who is one of the major Hindu goddesses. She's the goddess of the sacred marriage. She's the ultimate wife of Shiva. She's a yogic queen. She's the queen of Tantra. And she's married to this phallic tantric yogi god. So she is an awesome feminine universe. So like Hygeia in that earlier chart, having Parvati on conception point means that there is that quality of uniting It wasn't just sperm and egg meeting, that was enough. But having something like Pravati, and that, to excuse the unintended pun, that impregnates her cellular tissue with the memory of that event, which will forever subliminally go on to influence what she takes from her relationships. But it's not all fun. Because look what's in the seventh house, Saturn. So even though she's got this cellular level of the goddess in her, she meets this Saturn opposite Chiron. And she meets it in particular at the birth. And this gets reflected in other places as well. But the thing I want to focus on is there's Chiron, wounded healer, conjunct Mercury, conjunct Sun in Leo, conjunct Ascendant. Well, here's that Leo energy that ideally just wants to be free to go and be its brilliant self out there in the world. And yet, as we know, Chiron blocks, it wounds, it initially suppresses, damages the sign. Yeah. So here she hits some major trauma at her actual birth. We don't know exactly what that is, because, like everything astrological, it's not necessarily physical. Certainly, this can be a position where you have a difficult birth, where there's some experience of abandonment, that classic Chiron issue. The sun's involved, Mercury's involved. So it talks about dad's ring that's come to the fore in some way. Now, that can happen in any number of ways. Clearly, some men will jump over to the Saturn end. Yeah. Like my dad, he went to the pub while mum was in hospital. That was his way of not dealing with the fact that I was coming into this. But irrespective of that, anything that particularly is around the ascendant represents energies that have been pumped up in the mother's body. Yeah. Okay. You got an AI companion?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a client's requesting will be stopped. Oops.
Oh, you will get that?
You lost the page. Yeah. So, okay, we'll do that. Anything around the ascendant has an influence on the actual birth process. Whether it's overt interruption, matrix, etc. More often than not, it's the child's experience that is not seen, or not obvious to most. So if this Chiron's Mercury lies in a woman's body, that can talk about the wounded masculine self. It can talk about the wounded masculine in both sides of the family. And the wounding of that is pushed out by the intensity of the labour. This will often happen, particularly when women get given permission to be loud. More people, women can allow to do that, the more healing. So what can happen there is this client's mother can hit this stuff. It can be pushed up in her and influence her availability to the child, influence her ability to go with the organic process of attraction. And if you think about Chiron opposite Saturn, there's likely to be some jam. Sometimes the contractions stop at a critical point, particularly as the child is about to make the transition from In-Utero to experiential. That is a very scary place. So clearly something has happened there. Now, why the birthing is so strong? Here again is that epigenics thing. When we take first breath, on a rudimentary level of consciousness that we have, we take a holographic scan of the environment around us. On every level, okay, if you're born in a hospital, there's the bright lights and there's the strangers hovering over, etc. There's what's happening inside you, there's what's happening in. And on the basis of what we psychically tune into, we make all sorts of subliminal decisions about the nature of this life. Having Chiron there says, oh, this is a really wounded place. And I'm going to need to adapt to handling that woundedness. It also influences, get the ascendant symbology, how I'm going to show up in the world. We know Chiron descendant is someone who's a natural born healer, but she's going to have to go through a lot to get to that, including the birth, so that she doesn't just go out into life being a sponge for other people's pain. That's it, distorted Chiron. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Do we also look at the condition of the H1 and how the H1 is aspected?
Sorry,
H1.
the ruler of the eighth. Oh yes, yeah. Same with any astrological position. You check out the ruler, you check out the aspects to any planets. You can even check out the aspects to the conception point. And aspects to rules. You can go the whole hog of any of this. Yeah? That's why I keep it fairly simple, just functions at this point. Now, having Saturn in the seventh house, there's kind of an expectation that committed relationships equals challenges, equals struggle, equals strong sense of responsibility. So it's likely that in her early choice of relationships, she's going to pick through the lens of the Chiron Saturn position. And there'll be some important karmic and soul reasons why that's the case. Yeah. But as she goes through those experiences, and particularly as she's doing the deeper work, spiritually and therapeutically, and working with it, that will clear the way, eventually, slowly, progressively, so that not only can she unlock the Chiron Saturn opposition, where she finds a man who can really meet her in an authentic partnership, but then that Parvati potential at the conception can start to really come through more fully. Yeah. Okay, how are we going to time on? Last day. Okay. Now, obviously, around the ascendant, if you've got any particularly strong archetypes, Pluto on the ascendant, for instance, yeah? For some people, the symbolism at least is that being born is a life and death situation. Well, that's the feeling of it. Particularly if mum is frightened or if mum has lost someone earlier on, that can really come through, influence how mum can really open, how much fear is in the psychic environment of that child. I have probably 6 clients with Pluto ascendants, and they're all therapists of some form or another, you know? Because they've had to go and do that unlocking the birth state, so that they can fulfill that promise of being potential agents of transformation. World. I was just going to mention Uranus. Do you know much about your birth? Okay. With Uranus, you have to expect there was some major radical disturbance. Okay. A lot of people with cesareans will have that. Yeah. Okay. More likely, somebody split off, or somebody handled her without awareness badly. Yeah. Sometimes mum will split off, and so there's a psycho-spiritual abandonment experience. Yeah. Some babies are hypersensitive to having the cord cut too early. You know, it's Uranus. Yeah. It's not just mum, not just dad either, wherever it might be. It's also who are the professionals in the room. Yeah? Because with Uranus, and we've all met doctors who are incredibly heavy almost divorced from the emotional awareness of what they're saying or doing. So that might have had that kind of experience. Or there was actually an obvious emergency and they had to whip the child away. Yeah. So there's all sorts of possibilities there. But Uranus ascendant individuals, they are always going to enter the world differently as an expression of who they're going to become. And, you know, being agents of radical change, that revolution is part of it. My first therapist had Uranus on his ascendant, and he was not only a GP, he was a Jungian, and then he became a Sannyasin, and he was also head of the Druid order in Australia. He had all of that going on. Yeah? Brilliant, unpredictable man. I loved working with him. But yes, interesting time. Yeah.
There's a request from home. You can stay close to this just for the sound.
Yeah.
Stay close to that.
Okay.
The shower's birth would it be prior to birth without father's record water?
Sorry?
Shower's birth would have been prior to the era of birth without violence,
Yeah.
water.
Yeah. Yeah, the boy was
Completely different.
yeah, yeah. That was what's so great. He also came in at the same time. There was this convergence of things. All right, just let me check for a moment. Okay. Well, we better talk about Neptune if we're going to cover our bases. Neptune ascendant can be very, very tricky. Obviously, newborns are incredibly hypersensitive and vulnerable. Neptune ascendant baby, their psychic radar is enormous. Their level of psychic and spiritual sensitivity and emotional sensitivity is often over the top. Whether they can stay with that sensitivity is influenced by what happens at the birth. Yeah. Sometimes Neptune on the ascendant represents births that are drug induced, for instance, or painkillers are brought in, where it's over medicalized, for instance, because while the substances can diminish pain, like with the Uranus, it can also separate mum from child. Or mum goes floating off in a Neptune haze, and the child experiences that as an abandonment. Yeah, or I've got to do this on my own. When contractions stop, or if there's a halting of the process, that can actually elicit a medical intervention like forceps, for instance. Yeah? So if the Neptune thing is overdone in mother and child, it can set up a situation where another impact can come in. Neptune ascendant people should be born in water. Yeah, home births, spas, that's the ideal. but also needing to be really, really sensitized to the psychic environment. Yeah? If you know this is likely to head up, you know, you're going to take really good care of this child, psychically and spiritually. Yeah? Some children act as spiritual awakeners for their mothers. One of my favorite psychics is a very grounded, psychologically astute professional psychic. The birth of her daughter like cracked her open, her previously unknown psychic ability. And it turned out the daughter was innately incredible psychic as well. So much so that they had a great deal of difficulty separating out because of the mutual enmeshment between their openings. But they're both doing extraordinary things. So yeah, it depends, once again, on aspects, depends on how much control you've got over the environment. But yeah, LaGoya was like, thank God for that, or goddess for that. Yeah. Yeah. There's still some really archaic things that are happening, but they're a lot better than they used to be. All right.
I just had a quick look at my twins chart, and everything you said has made sense to what I actually experienced in the birth and the hospital situation that nobody in my family knows about.
If this stuff is of interest to you, have a look at this documentary. Like we were working this territory nearly 30, 40 years ago, but now it's actually getting more and more awareness out there. And look at the names involved with that. It's a great documentary, multi-award. Okay. Yeah, that's just a note about there's no neat fit between the trimesters. And so I say to people, you know, just guesstimate. Interpretively, it's not great where it plays out, but you get an approximate idea. But as we've pointed out, it's the conception and the birth position that are most critical. Yeah. I still use the classes. Yeah. I would love the time to do more research, run more workshops, and to interview people, because breath work opens similar territory. There's Buddhist womb conditioning meditations, and you know, within the kind of shamanic midwifery world, you know, there are lots of practices that can drop people into these places. But yeah, you need time to do it. Yeah. So,
is there any specific planetary signature that you've observed for children who are not completed their entire term, like those immature baby or beyond the term of these 3 times?
I don't know if I can. How to deal with preemie babies, for instance.
Yeah, is there a planetary signature?
Not that I'm aware of, but I wouldn't be looking for them.
And having nodes on the ascending, there any particular characteristics that you can have? The nodes, the mouth nodes.
Nodes. It's not stuff I've seen specifically, but I do know, and this was true for myself as well, like our babies they're still really connected to their past life stuff. And that stuff can show up in their in-utero journeys. I had a major, my north node's on my ascendant, and I had a big opening at my birth. And it has to be in there. Yeah. Same with the dark goddesses. The dark goddesses are so deep. They're intricately connected with our soul's journey. And particularly if they also play out in the utero journey, they're significant too. So yeah, I can't be any more specific than that. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, big thanks to all the people who did this kind of really fundamental stuff. And like I said, it was early 80s, there was this whole convergence around the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, 82, around that. This was all kind of coming to the surface.
And you will be done thinking much with Stan Groff?
No, the one chance I had to work with him, I couldn't make it to the offering.
Because he's done a lot.
Yeah.
I know he talks about all births are an interaction with all our planets. Not in relation to your personal horoscope, but just in an archetypal sense.
Yeah.
So we all come out of Neptune, in the room. So we can Neptune influence the contractions triggered by Saturn.
Yeah.
The descent then with the now is triggered by Pluto. Like the truth descent.
Yeah.
And then the final sort of interaction with life through Uranus and shock.
Okay.
So he took a lot of people through, as you said, like primal therapy type regression type things to reconnect with those stages of birth as well. And their relation to the archetypal energy. You already know, so.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in tarot card notice. I mean, people have different systems in tarot, obviously, but card notice, the Uranus card, like with a card notice, you could say the entry into life. That's Uranus.
Yeah. Similarly, in the Shiva Shakti traditions of India, they talk about Kali rules the birth process, because for many women, the birth process is the nearest they come to that really kind of life and death edge, where you actually have to completely surrender. And that's said to be a very Kali moment. And then that kind of fits with the Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, because Pluto, Neptune, Uranus all have big feminine aspects to them, particularly Neptune and Pluto. So it's not just the masculine. Yeah. But similar territory, just different ways of describing it. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, this stuff we've already covered. Oh, here's a great one. This is why it's important not to psychologize this overly. Yeah, this is just because of my lens and my practice. But any archetype that's around your ascendant, and this is something really beautiful you can say to people about whether it's their own chart, their children's chart, anyone's chart. Whoever they are, in their pure form, they are overseeing. They are the overlords of your birth. Yeah? So you think about who they are and their essence. And, you know, as gods, goddesses, etc., they are present. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yes, there's a lot of craziness around. I think we've covered most of this. Here's another one specifically for us astrologers. One way of tracking the sequence of energetic shifts and changes in the birth is tracking what the transiting ascendant is doing. Now, let's see. I'll demonstrate this. Our ascendant shift, as we know, 4 degrees. Is it
1 degree.
1 minute every 4 minutes. Yeah, yeah. So have a look at this. Here's our actual birth experience. 13 degrees of Leo. Sun is at 9 degrees of Leo. So there's a 4-degree difference. 4 degrees different talks about 16 minutes. Yeah. So in the lead up to this first person's birth, the transiting ascendant crosses her sun, or what will be her sun. Yeah. Then 4 minutes later, Mercury and Chiron. And so that talks about the likelihood of whatever event has got that Chiron sphere, if you like, is in the last 4 minutes, last 4 to 6 minutes. So this is something you can do with a person's chart. You can keep going. Well, look at her Venus, for instance, after the actual birth, 10 degrees along is her Venus. Yeah. So that gives you a timing of when the ascendant crosses the transiting horizon, if you like, crosses her Venus. So that can give you a sense of the stages that lead up to the actual birth and to some of the aftermath. So that's worth looking at. I've tried it again and again. It seems to work, at least from what people know about their experiences. So that's quite a specific thing that's come out of this. As you can gather, I'm not so concerned about, interpretive issues here. It's more, these are the archetypes, these are the energies. And not just from a therapeutic point of view, but also in terms of the experiential astrology. This gives you opportunities and gives you places where you can actually identify critical points that you can work with. All right. We all made it. Okay, how's the time? You got time for a few questions? Any questions that people have sent in? Yeah.
If that was your last slide, then you'll be able to see.
What's the experience of Venus? Venus, Earth.
Pretty good one. Yeah. You get those ecstatic births, or where the love is immediate. There's no interruptions to it. There's a whole Venusian. It's a bit like how Zane Stein describes Chirikwa, just bathing in a bath of love. Yeah.
And some I've got like a little bit scientific information has been coming up lately about the moment of inception. I'm thinking of also strategies to do with this as well. At the moment of inception, between the sperm and the ovum, there's an actual flash of light.
Yep.
And that's very similar to what they think is happening on the shroud.
Okay. Yeah, I can reinforce from my experience like that. So just a light-filled experience.
There's a question I think about this, but
is there a list of goddesses you add to view in the chart? This is a highly individualistic thing. I have 12 different asteroids, and I do 2 of the Lilith, Black Moon and Lilith asteroid, Ceres, Pallas, Juno, Vesta, Hygeia, Psyche, Persephone, Hecate, Medusa, Kali, and Pavati. It's an eclectic mix that's all my own. And this is what I encourage people to do. You'll have your own mix that's resonant with you. Okay. My apologies to everyone out there for the quality of sound. I think we're done.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone at home. We'll check in with Daniel to see what he's happy to share, and the recording as well. Maybe if there's ways to tweak the sound on your computer if it was difficult to hear at times. But otherwise, just reach out to us and we can see what we can organise. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Bye. That's all.